Hi, my name is Waleed. Today I want to present about leavisian criticism. Leavisian criticism. If R. Leavis has a strong claim to be the most influential British critic of the 20th century. He had a good deal in common with the American new critics, in that he attached great importance to language and literary form. In particular, he emphasized the inactive power of literary language. But there is a strong moral dimension to his criticism than one finds in the new critics. It is perhaps paradoxical, however, to include him in a book devoted to literary theory, since he refused to discuss his critical position in theoretical terms. The essay Literary Criticism and Philosophy, first published in Scrutiny in 1937, was response to Rainey Wilke's view that he needed to spell out the theoretical basis of his criticism. Willie wrote, "Allow me to sketch your ideal of poetry, your norm with which you measure every poet. Your poetry must be in serious relation to actuality. It must have a firm grasp of the actual, of the object. It must be in relation to life. It must not be cut off from direct vulgar living. It should be normally human, testify to spiritual health and sanity. It should not be personal in the sense of indulging in personal dreams and fantasies. There should be no emotion for its own sake in it, but a sharp, concrete realization, a sensuous particularity. The language of your poetry must not be cut off from speech, should not flatter the singing voice, should not be merely mellifluous. I would ask you to define this position more abstractly and to become conscious that large ethical, philosophical, and of course, ultimately, also aesthetic choices are involved." Though Leavis in his reply refused to define his critical position in abstract terms, the arguments he uses to justify his refusal are of considerable theoretical interest. A theoretical justification of Leavis' position can, however, be formulated as John Casey shows in his book The Language of Criticism. Indeed, Casey argues that the implied theory that underlies Leavis' critical practice is both intuitive and cognate, since it embodies a synthesis of expressionist and mimetic theories of art. Kenneth Dover was an American literary theorist, as well as poet, essayist, and novelist who wrote on 20th century philosophy, essayistics, criticism, and as a literary theorist, Park was best known for his analysis based on the nature of knowledge. Further, he was one of the first individuals to stray away from more traditional rhetoric and view literature as symbolic action. What is formalist criticism? Formalist criticism is defined as a literary criticism approach which provides readers with a way to understand and enjoy a work for its own inherent value. As a piece of literary art, formalist critics spend a great deal of time analyzing irony, paradox, imagery, and metaphor. Two major principles of formalist criticism. A literary text exists independent of a particular reader and, in a sense, has fixed meaning. The greatest literary texts are timeless and universal. Limits of formalist criticism. Formalism has its limits. Well-known limits include Gödel's theorems and turning and churches and decidable problems. Formalism concerns the word of numbers. The study of numbers is through computation, but computation is a number. The vast majority of numbers are not computable by programs shorter than themselves. Furthermore, computation is a state machine that might cycle forever, never producing a number. These are limits intrinsic to formalism itself. The word provides further limits. There are questions of doubt, the rich diversity of the word, the word's irrationality, ethical questions, subjective experiences, inconsistencies, the need to get things done, and so forth. In brief, formalism is only one part of the word. It is mistake to force the word into formalism. Frank Raymond, Fr. Levis.Ch. was an English literary critic of the early to mid 20th century. He taught for much of his career at Downing College, Cambridge, and later at the University of York. Levis became a Cambridge institution. J.B. Bambro wrote of him in 1963, "It would be true to say that in the last 30 or more years, hardly anyone seriously concerned with the study of English literature has not been influenced by him in some way." Literary criticism and philosophy. Fr. Levis was famous as a literary critic not only for his views about literature, but also for his views about the nature of literary criticism. Among these latter, the most interesting for philosophers is his insistence that the literary critic has no need to conduct a systematic philosophical defense of his canons of judgment. Levis maintained that though any piece of criticism may seem to rest on assumptions and embody generalizations about human life, these should be defended in relation to particular works of literature the critic is writing about. The critic should resist the invitation to order them into a theory which may then be abstractly defended. These views are most succinctly and clearly set out in Levis' essay, Literary Criticism and Philosophy, which is a reply to comments offered by René Waleed on Levis' theory of English poetry, Revelation. It will be helpful to look at Waleed's comments before we examine Levis's views in detail. The basic case presented by Waleed is as follows. John D. Casey, born 1939 in Western Massachusetts, is an American novelist and translator. He won the U.S. National Book Award for Fiction in 1989 for Spartina. John Casey is a main character on the NBC television series Check On. A former Marine, NSA agent, Casey had a reputation for ruthless efficiency and an unforgiving nature. John Casey, Object, Feeling, and Judgment. In Levis, we have a critic who becomes aware of the paradoxes inherent in romantic expressionism, and whose solution is a remarkably interesting synthesis of expressionist and mimetic theories. In his criticism, we have the most thoroughgoing attempt to return, on the one hand, the emphasis on the emotional importance of literature, and yet to provide, on the other, objective criteria for judging the quality of emotion a poem presents. The first thing to be noticed is that Levis's critical arguments do not characteristically proceed from the particular to the general. To assert this at the outset may seem merely dogmatic. It is, after all, very easy to point some extremely general terms in Levis's vocabulary, life, maturity, and so on, which seem to be paradigms or central criteria, the ultimate premises of the critical system. Thank you.